Jacob Cole pulled his horse to a dead stop. The sound cut through the December wind like a knife, a child's scream, raw and desperate somewhere beyond the frozen trail. His hands tightened on the reins. Every instinct told him to keep riding. He'd spent 5 years outrunning the ghosts of a wife and child he couldn't save. But that scream, God help him, that scream, sounded exactly like the cry he'd imagined his own baby might have made if she'd lived long enough to make any sound at all. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe and follow to the end. Comment your city below. I want to see how far this tale of second chances travels. Jacob didn't move. The scream came again, higher this time, more desperate. His mare, a gray Mustang named Dust, shifted beneath him. Her ears flattened against the sound. Easy girl. But his own voice came out rough, broken, like a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks. Because he hadn't. The trail stretched empty behind him, empty ahead. Nothing but Wyoming wilderness in every direction. Snow piling thick on the sagebrush, the late afternoon sun already dropping toward the mountains. He could ride on, should ride on. Whatever trouble waited out there wasn't his concern. He'd learned that lesson 5 years ago in Kansas, learned it in the blood of a woman who'd trusted him to be there when she needed him most. He hadn't been there. The child screamed again. Jacob closed his eyes. Eleanor's face swam up from the darkness, pale still, already gone by the time he'd ridden 30 miles through a thunderstorm to reach her side. Damn it! He turned Dust toward the sound. The girl appeared from behind a snow-covered boulder like a ghost made flesh. Small, thin, dark hair tangled with ice and twigs. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, and she was running straight at him with bare feet, leaving bloody prints in the snow. Mr. Please. Jacob swung down from the saddle before he'd made the conscious decision to stop. The girl slammed into his legs, her frozen fingers clawing at his coat. Please, you gotta help. Mama won't wake up. She won't wake up, and I tried everything and nobody'll come and... Slow down. He crouched to her level, and the child's face stopped his breath. Blue eyes, wide and terrified, just like no. Don't think about that. What's your name? Hannah. Hannah Brennan. Please, mister, my mama's sick. Real sick. 4 days now, and she just keeps getting worse. And I went to the Johansons, but they said they couldn't help. Said they had their own troubles, and I've been walking since morning trying to find someone. Anyone. Her voice broke into sobs. Her whole body shook, not just from cold, but from the kind of fear that came from watching someone you loved slip away while you stood helpless. Jacob knew that fear. Knew it like his own heartbeat. Where's your pa? Dead. The word came flat, empty. Horse threw him last spring. Mama and me been on our own since. A widow and child, alone through a Wyoming winter. The arithmetic of survival calculated itself in Jacob's head, and none of the numbers added up to anything good. Where's your cabin? 3 miles that way. Hannah pointed west toward the mountains. Maybe 4. I ain't sure. I got turned around in the snow and... Can you ride? She nodded frantically. Jacob lifted her onto Dust's back, then swung up behind her. The girl weighed almost nothing, all bones and desperation. Hold on. He kicked Dust into a canter. The cabin appeared as the last light bled from the sky, a dark shape huddled in a hollow smoke, barely trickling from a dying chimney. Jacob's gut tightened at the sight. No lamp in the window, no movement. The kind of stillness that usually meant only one thing. Mama's in there. Hannah was already scrambling down before Dust came to a full stop. Mama, I brought help. She ran for the door. Jacob tied Dust to a leaning fence post and followed his hand, dropping automatically to the revolver at his hip. The smell hit him first. Sweat, sickness, the sour stench of fever sweat and unchanged bedding. He'd smelled it before in army field hospitals and trail camps where men died of cholera in a small farmhouse in Kansas where his wife had labored alone while he was too far away to hear her screams. "Mama, wake up. Please wake up. The man came. I found someone." Hannah knelt beside a narrow bed in the corner, shaking the shoulder of a woman who didn't respond. Jacob crossed the room in 3 strides. The woman Sarah he'd learn later lay motionless under a thin quilt. Her face burned with fever even in the dim light. Dark hair plastered to her forehead, lips cracked and bleeding. Her breathing came shallow and fast, the kind that meant the lungs were filling with something they shouldn't. He pressed his hand to her forehead and jerked back at the heat. "How long has she been like this?" "4 days." Hannah's voice cracked. She was just tired at first. Then she got the shakes. Then yesterday she stopped knowing who I was. She kept calling me Elizabeth. That was my grandma's name. She died before I was born. Delirium. High fever. 4 days in. Jacob had seen men die from less. "Hannah, I need you to listen to me." He turned to face the child, making his voice steady, even though his heart was hammering. "Your mama is very sick, but I'm going to do everything I can to help her. You understand? You won't leave." The question hit like a blow, because he could see it in her eyes, the absolute certainty that he would. That everyone left eventually. That she'd already learned at 8 years old not to trust promises. "I won't leave." The next hours blurred into a rhythm of desperate action. Water. The rain barrel outside was frozen solid on top, but liquid beneath. Jacob broke through the ice with his boot heel and hauled bucket after bucket inside. Fire. The hearth had nearly died. He fed it back to life with the last of the wood stacked by the door, then sent Hannah to find more while he worked on her mother. Cool cloths. Over and over. Forehead, neck, wrists. Anywhere the blood ran close to the surface. Sarah moaned at the contact, her head turning restlessly, words spilling out that made no sense. "William, the fence needs mending. Told you about the north pasture." "Who's William?" Jacob asked. "My papa." Hannah had returned with an armful of wood, her small face serious. "He's dead." She thinks she's talking to him. She's been doing that, talking to him like he's here. Sometimes she talks to Grandma Elizabeth too. Fever dreams, the mind retreating to safer places when the body started failing. Jacob wrung out another cloth, pressed it to Sarah's burning skin. Her eyes opened suddenly, brown unfocused, looking straight through him. "William?" "No, ma'am. My name's Jacob Cole. Your daughter found me on the trail. I'm here to help." "William, the baby's coming. You have to—" Her voice trailed off, her eyes sliding closed again. Hannah made a small sound. When Jacob looked up, the girl had her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "What baby?" "There ain't no baby." Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. "There was gonna be one. After Papa died. But Mama got sick that time too, and when she got better the baby was gone. She don't remember most times. But when she's like this, she talks about it." Jesus Christ. Jacob turned back to Sarah Brennan. This woman he didn't know who'd lost her husband, and then her unborn child, and still somehow kept going, kept surviving, kept fighting for the daughter who needed her. And now she was dying anyway. "I need to get a doctor." "There ain't one for miles. Nearest is in Cody. That's 12 miles at least, maybe more in this snow." "Then I'll ride to Cody." "You can't." Hannah's voice rose in panic. "What if Mama gets worse? What if—" "Hannah." Jacob gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Your mama needs medicine I don't have. She needs someone who knows how to treat this. I can't help her with just water and rags. You understand. But you said you wouldn't leave." "I'll come back. Everyone says that." The words tore out of her raw with grief. Papa said he'd be back for supper, and he never came home. Mama said she'd always be here, and now she won't wake up. People always say they'll come back, and they don't. They don't. Jacob's chest constricted. He thought about Eleanor, about the promise he'd made before riding out that morning. "I'll be back before dark, sweetheart. Don't you worry about a thing." He hadn't been back before dark. Hadn't been back for 2 days. And when he finally rode up to that farmhouse, a neighbor was waiting on the porch with the kind of face that said everything words couldn't. "Hannah, look at me." The girl looked up, her blue eyes swimming. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to believe it. Can you do that?" She nodded slowly. 5 years ago, I broke a promise to someone I loved. She needed me, and I wasn't there, and she died because of it. I've spent every day since then running from that. Trying to outrun the guilt, trying to pretend it didn't matter, trying to tell myself that if I never made another promise, I couldn't break another one. He paused, the words coming harder than he'd expected. "But your mama is dying, and you're 8 years old, and you've already lost your pa, and you walked barefoot through the snow for hours trying to find help. That kind of courage—" His voice cracked. "That kind of courage deserves better than a man who breaks his word. So you'll come back. You promise?" "I promise. On my life, Hannah. I will come back." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for the lie, for the easy reassurance that meant nothing. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded once. "Okay, I believe you." Jacob rode through the darkness with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. The snow fell harder now, thick flakes that cut visibility to almost nothing. Dust stumbled twice on hidden obstacles, and both times Jacob's heart seized with the certainty that the horse would go down and he'd fail again, break another promise, leave another child waiting for help that would never come. But dust found her footing, kept moving, mile after frozen mile. The lights of Cody appeared around midnight, a scattered handful of buildings clustered around a main street that was more mud than road, even frozen solid. Jacob spotted a sign reading, "Dr. N. Webb, Physician," and dismounted before dust had fully stopped. His fist hammered on the door. "Dr. Webb, I need help." Silence. Then footsteps. The door cracked open to reveal a gray-haired man in a nightshirt, his eyes bleary with interrupted sleep. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "There's a woman dying, 12 miles west of here. Oh, Brennan Homestead. High fever 4 days, she's not conscious. Her daughter's alone with her." "Brennan." The doctor's expression shifted. "The widow? You know her." "I know she can't pay. Sent her husband's doctor bills to collection after he died. Never saw a cent." Jacob's jaw tightened. "I can pay." "With what?" He reached into his coat and pulled out the leather pouch that held everything he owned. $47 in mixed bills and coins, enough to survive another 2 months on the trail. He held it out. "Everything I have. Take it. Just come now." Dr. Webb looked at the money, then at Jacob's face, then back at the money. "That's maybe enough for the visit and basic treatment. If she needs surgery, medicine, extended care." I said, "Take it." The doctor's eyes narrowed. "You her family." "I'm a stranger who heard her daughter screaming on the trail this afternoon. Now are you going to help, or am I going to drag you there myself?" Something shifted in the older man's expression. He stepped back from the door. "Give me 10 minutes to dress and gather supplies. There's a stable around back, see to your horse, and I'll meet you at the front." Jacob led Dust to the stable, his hands shaking as he loosened the cinch and threw a blanket over the mare's sweat-soaked back. 10 minutes, then 12 miles back through the snow. Then he'd find out if his promise meant anything at all. They rode in silence, Dr. Webb on a sturdy bay gelding that seemed to know the way without guidance. The snow had eased to scattered flakes, and a half-moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting enough light to navigate. "You said you're a stranger." The doctor's voice broke the quiet. "What's your stake in this? Does it matter? Might. A man who gives up every cent he owns for a woman he doesn't know, that's either a fool or a saint. Neither one usually ends well. Jacob didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he wasn't sure himself. 24 hours ago, he'd been riding through Wyoming, with no destination, no purpose, no reason to stop for anything or anyone. Then a child had screamed. "My wife died 5 years ago," he heard himself say. "In childbirth. I was 30 miles away earning money for the farm. By the time I got back, she was already in the ground. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I made choices. She paid for them." His hands tightened on the reins. "Today I heard a girl crying, and I had another choice to make. Ride past or stop." "You stopped." "Barely. Almost didn't." "But you did. That's the part that matters." Jacob wasn't sure about that. Wasn't sure anything he did now could balance the scales of what he'd failed to do before. But Hannah believed he'd come back, and Sarah Brennan was dying, and for the first time in 5 years, something mattered enough to make him try. But the cabin looked darker than he'd left it. The fire had burned low, and for one terrible moment, Jacob was certain they'd arrived too late. Then Hannah appeared in the doorway, her small figure silhouetted against the faint glow within. "You came back." The wonder in her voice nearly broke him. "I told you I would." He dismounted and crossed to her, crouching to her level. "How's your mama?" "The same, I think, maybe worse. She stopped talking a while ago, just lies there. I kept putting the cold cloths on like you said, but I don't know if it helped." "You did exactly right." He squeezed her shoulder. "Now I brought someone who can help more. This is Dr. Webb." The doctor had already pushed past them into the cabin, his medical bag in hand. Jacob guided Hannah inside and closed the door against the cold. What followed was an hour that stretched like years. Dr. Webb examined Sarah with methodical precision, listening to her lungs, checking her pulse, examining her eyes and throat. His face remained carefully neutral throughout, revealing nothing. Finally, he straightened and turned to face them. Pneumonia. Both lungs. Severe dehydration, making everything worse. "Can you help her?" Hannah's voice was barely audible. "I can try. But I need to be honest with you, child. Your mother is very sick. If this had gone another day, maybe even another 12 hours. He shook his head. "The next 24 hours will tell us whether she'll fight through or not." "But she's a fighter." Hannah stepped forward. Her small fists clenched. "She's the strongest person I know. After Papa died, everyone said we should give up the homestead, go back east, but Mama said we didn't come all this way to quit. She said Brennans don't quit." Something flickered in the doctor's eyes. "Then let's make sure she gets the chance to keep fighting." Dawn found them still working. Dr. Webb had administered willow bark for the fever and a tincture for Sarah's lungs. He'd shown Jacob how to position her to help with breathing, how to drip water between her cracked lips, how to monitor the fever's rise and fall. Hannah had finally collapsed into exhausted sleep on a pile of blankets by the fire, her small hand still reaching toward her mother's bed even in unconsciousness. Jacob sat in a straight-backed chair between them, keeping watch. "You should rest." Dr. Webb looked up from repacking his bag. "I've done what I can for now. The medicine will either work or it won't. Exhausting yourself won't change the outcome. I'll rest when she wakes up. Could be hours, could be days. Then I'll wait." The doctor studied him for a long moment. "You know, when you showed up at my door tonight, I figured you for a fool. Man throwing away his last dollar for a stranger riding through a blizzard in the dark, that's the kind of thing that gets people killed out here. You came anyway." "I did." Webb picked up his bag and moved toward the door. "I'll be back this afternoon to check on her. Keep doing what you're doing. And Mr. Cole, yeah. Whatever guilt you've been carrying around for 5 years. Whatever you think you failed to do showing up here tonight doesn't erase that. But it matters. It matters to that little girl. It matters to her mother. And maybe if you let it, it can matter to you too." He left before Jacob could respond. The cabin fell quiet. Only the crackle of the fire and the shallow rasp of Sarah's breathing broke the silence. Jacob looked at the woman in the bed, this stranger whose life now rested on medicine and luck, and the determination of an 8-year-old who refused to let her mother die. Then he looked at Hannah, curled small and trusting by the hearth, her face peaceful for the first time since he'd met her. He'd made a promise to come back. He'd kept it. But sitting here now, watching the fire burn low as the first gray light of dawn crept through the cabin's single window, Jacob realized that promise had been the easy part. The hard part was what came next. Staying. Caring. Letting himself matter to someone again, and letting them matter to him. He'd spent 5 years running from exactly that. And now, in a half-frozen cabin in the Wyoming wilderness with a dying woman and her daughter depending on him, Jacob Cole understood that he'd finally run out of road. There was nowhere left to go but here. Sarah's breathing changed just before noon. Jacob heard at first a wet rattling sound that hadn't been there an hour ago. He was on his feet before he'd fully registered the alarm, crossing to the bed in 2 strides. "Hannah, wake up." The girl stirred on her blankets, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Get more water. Now." Hannah scrambled up and ran for the door without asking questions. She'd learned that tone in the hours since Jacob arrived, the voice that meant something had shifted, and not for the better. Jacob pressed his hand to Sarah's forehead, still burning, maybe hotter than before. Her lips had gone from cracked to almost blue, and each breath seemed to cost her more effort than the last. "Come on," he muttered. "Don't do this. Your daughter's counting on you." Sarah's eyes fluttered. For one moment they actually focused on his face. "Who?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Who are you?" "Jacob Cole. I'm helping your daughter take care of you." "Hannah." Sarah tried to sit up and immediately collapsed back, gasping. "Where's Hannah?" "Getting water. She's fine. She's been taking care of you for 4 days, and she's the reason I'm here." 4 days! Confusion clouded Sarah's face. William was just here. He said something about the fence." "William's not here, ma'am. It's just me and Hannah." Something shifted in Sarah's expression. The fever fog lifted for just a moment, and Jacob saw the woman underneath, sharp aware, terrified. "He's dead." It wasn't a question. "William's dead. I keep forgetting." "I know. And I'm dying." The bluntness of it hit Jacob like a fist. He wanted to deny it, offer easy comfort, tell her everything would be fine. But this woman deserved better than lies. "You're very sick. Doctor came this morning. He's coming back this afternoon." "Doctor costs money." "Already paid." "With what?" Sarah's eyes searched his face. "I don't know you. Why would you pay for my doctor?" Hannah burst back through the door with the water bucket, sloshing half of it across the floor in her haste. She saw her mother's eyes open and let out a cry that was half sob, half laugh. "Mama!" "You're awake." "Baby girl?" Sarah's hand reached weakly toward her daughter. "Come here." Hannah flew to the bedside, throwing herself against her mother with the desperate grip of a child who'd spent 4 days wondering if she'd ever hear that voice again. "I thought you were gonna die. I thought you were gonna leave me like Papa did, and I'd be all alone and—" "Shh!" Sarah's fingers tangled weakly in her daughter's hair. "I'm here. I'm still here." Jacob stepped back, giving them space. Something in his chest ached at the sight mother and daughter clinging to each other, the raw love between them so fierce it seemed to fill the whole cabin. He'd had that once. For one brief, perfect year with Eleanor. Then he'd lost it. "Mama, Mr. Cole saved us." Hannah pulled back enough to look at her mother's face. "I found him on the trail, and he came back with me, and he took care of you all night, and he rode to Cody in the dark to get the doctor, and he gave all his money and—" "Hannah." Sarah's voice was weak but firm. "Slow down. Take a breath." The girl gulped air, her words tumbling to a stop. Sarah's gaze shifted to Jacob, who stood by the fire, trying to look like he hadn't just heard himself described as some kind of hero. "Is that true? You gave all your money?" "The doctor needed payment. I had money. Simple arithmetic." "Nothing about this is simple." Sarah's eyes held his brown and deep and far too knowing for a woman who'd been unconscious an hour ago. "Why?" It was the same question Hannah had asked, the same question he'd been asking himself since he'd heard that first scream on the trail. "Because your daughter asked for help," he said finally, "and I was tired of being the kind of man who rides past." Dr. Webb arrived in the early afternoon, stamping snow from his boots as he entered. "Well, well." He took in the scene: Sarah propped against pillows, Hannah pressed close to her side, Jacob standing guard by the fire. "Look who decided to rejoin the living." "Doctor." Sarah's voice was stronger than it had been, though still rough. "I understand. I owe you my life." "You owe your daughter your life. She's the one who walked barefoot through a blizzard looking for help." Webb set down his bag and approached the bed. "Let me take a look at you." The examination took longer this time. Webb listened to Sarah's lungs for what felt like hours, his expression unreadable. He checked her pulse, her temperature, the color of her nail beds. Finally, he straightened. "Well," Jacob demanded. "Better than this morning. The fever's dropping. Her lungs still sound like a barn full of sick cattle, but they're clearing." He turned to Sarah. "You're going to live, Mrs. Brennan, though I suspect you'll wish you hadn't for the next few weeks. Recovery from pneumonia this severe isn't pleasant." Hannah burst into tears. "Hey now," Webb said gruffly. "Those had better be happy tears." "They are." Hannah wiped her face with her sleeve. "I'm just so... Mama's gonna live. She's really gonna live." Sarah pulled her daughter close, her own eyes bright with moisture she was too proud to let fall. Over Hannah's head, she met Jacob's gaze. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know how to... Don't." Jacob's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Just focus on getting better." Webb packed his bag with efficient movements. "I'll leave more medicine. Same dosing as before. She needs rest water and food when she can keep it down. I'll check back in 3 days unless something changes." 3 days. Hannah's head snapped up. "What if she gets worse again? Then someone rides to get me. But I don't think that'll happen. Your mother's through the worst of it." Webb moved toward the door, then paused. "Mr. Cole, a word outside." Jacob followed him into the cold. The doctor didn't speak immediately. He stood looking out at the snow-covered hollow, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "She's going to live," he said finally. "But she won't be able to work for weeks, maybe months. And winter's barely started. I figured as much. That homestead won't run itself. That girl can't manage it alone. And Mrs. Brennan's too proud to ask for help from folks she thinks have already turned her away." Jacob's jaw tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying she needs someone to stay. Someone who can do the work she can't. Someone that little girl trusts." Webb turned to face him. "You rode 12 miles in a blizzard for a stranger. You gave up every cent you owned. So either you're planning to stick around and see this through, or you're the cruelest kind of fool, the kind who saves someone just to abandon them." "I'm not." Jacob stopped. What was he? He'd made a promise to Hannah. He'd kept it. That was supposed to be the end. But looking at that cabin, knowing what waited inside. A woman too weak to lift her head, a child too young to survive alone. A winter that would kill them both without help. He knew the doctor was right. Riding away now would be worse than never stopping at all. "Through winter," he heard himself say. "I'll stay through winter. Make sure they're set up to survive. After that you can figure out the rest." Webb mounted his horse. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. That little girl needs stability almost as much as her mother needs medicine." He rode away without waiting for a response. Jacob stood in the cold for a long moment, watching until horse and rider disappeared over the ridge. through winter. 3 months, maybe 4. Then he'd move on. That was the plan anyway. When he went back inside, Sarah was asleep again. Real sleep this time, not the death-like unconsciousness of the fever. Hannah sat beside the bed, her mother's hand clasped in both of hers. Is she okay? Sleeping. That's good. Her body needs rest to heal. Mr. Cole. Hannah's voice was small. Dr. Webb said Mama won't be able to work for a long time. How are we going to manage? I can do chores, but I can't chop wood good enough, and the roof leaks when the snow's heavy, and we're almost out of flour, and... Hannah. Jacob crouched beside her. I talked to the doctor. I'm going to stay for a while. Help out around here until your mama's back on her feet. The girl's eyes went wide. You mean it? You're not just saying that. I mean it. For how long? Through winter. We'll figure out the rest later. Hannah threw her arms around his neck so fast he nearly toppled backward. Her thin body shook against his, and he realized she was crying again, silent tears that soaked into the collar of his coat. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Jacob's arms came up awkwardly to hold her. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had hugged him. The contact felt strange and familiar all at once, like a language he'd once spoken fluently and forgotten. You're welcome, he managed. Now come on, let your mama rest. We've got work to do. The next days blurred into a rhythm of necessity. Jacob discovered the cabin's problems one by one. The gaps in the chinking that let in deadly drafts, the sagging section of roof, the door that wouldn't close properly, the woodpile that was half the size it needed to be for winter. He started with the wood. The axe handle was cracked, and he spent an hour replacing it with a spare he found in the lean-to, rough-shaped but serviceable. Then he chopped until his shoulders burned and his hands blistered, stacking logs higher than his head, building the reserves they'd need when the real cold came. Hannah followed him everywhere, asking questions, trying to help, desperate to be useful. Papa used to let me stack the small pieces. Then stack the small pieces. He said I was good at it, said I had an eye for making things fit together right. Show me. She did. Her small hands arranged the logs with surprising precision, fitting them together like puzzle pieces, creating a structure that was more stable than it had any right to be. Your papa was right, Jacob said. You do have an eye. Hannah glowed. Inside, Sarah drifted between sleep and wakefulness. Each time she surfaced, she seemed a little stronger, her voice a little clearer, her eyes a little brighter. On the 3rd day, she managed to sit up without help. On the 4th, she ate solid food. This is ridiculous. She pushed away the bowl of broth Jacob had brought. I should be up. There's work to be done. There's work being done. By me and Hannah. That's my point. You're doing my work. I'm lying here like an invalid while a stranger runs my household. You were dying 4 days ago. Give yourself time. I don't have time. Sarah's voice cracked with frustration. Winter's coming. The roof needs patching. The stores need restocking. The roof's already patched. Jacob set the bowl down firmly. I did it yesterday. And I'm going to town tomorrow to trade for supplies. I shot 2 deer last week, the meat's hanging in the lean-to. We've got enough to trade for flour, salt, whatever else we need. Sarah stared at him. You patched the roof? It needed doing. With what materials? Found some boards in the lean-to. Your husband had supplies stored. I used those. Something flickered across Sarah's face. Grief and gratitude tangled together. William was always preparing for things, she said quietly. Always planning ahead. He'd stockpile supplies for projects he'd never get to saying, just in case. I used to tease him about it. Sounds like a smart man. He was. Smartest man I ever knew. Sarah's hand found the edge of the quilt fingers plucking at loose threads. Also the most stubborn. He'd never ask for help either, even when he needed it. Jacob recognized the opening. That where you learned it? Learned what? To refuse help, even when you're dying. Sarah's eyes flashed. I didn't refuse help. I was unconscious. You've been refusing it for months. That's what Hannah told me. Neighbors offered and you turned them down. Said you could manage. Because I could manage. We were doing fine until... She stopped, her jaw tight. Until you got sick. Yes, until I got sick. And then everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for since William died, it almost killed my daughter. Her voice broke on the last words. She walked barefoot through a blizzard, Mr. Cole. My 8-year-old child nearly froze to death because I was too proud to accept help before it was too late. The anguish in her voice cut through Jacob's defenses. You couldn't have known you'd get sick. But I knew we were struggling. I knew we were barely holding on. And I told myself it was enough that I was enough because admitting otherwise felt like admitting William died for nothing. Sarah wiped angrily at her eyes. So don't lecture me about refusing help. I know what it cost. I'll live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. Jacob sat down heavily in the chair beside her bed. You want to know why I stopped when I heard Hannah crying? Sarah looked at him, surprise breaking through her grief. 5 years ago, I had a wife, Eleanor. We had a farm in Kansas, barely getting by, but we were happy. Then she got pregnant, and I was so damn proud. So sure I could give my family everything they needed. He paused. The words came harder now. But I was also too proud to ask for help. When things got tight, I took a job 30 miles away. Good money, but it meant being gone for days at a time. Eleanor told me she was worried about being alone. I told her she was strong, she could handle it. What happened? She went into labor early. Complications. By the time a neighbor found her, it was too late. She'd been calling for help for hours, but there was no one to hear. Jacob's voice had gone flat. I didn't even know until 2 days later. Rode up to that farmhouse and found her already in the ground. Her and the baby both. Sarah's hand moved, tentative, found his where it rested on the chair arm. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I understand what it's like to be too proud to accept help until it's too late. I've been running from that lesson for 5 years, telling myself if I never put down roots, never let myself matter to anyone, I couldn't hurt anyone else. But you stopped for Hannah. I almost didn't. The admission scraped his throat raw. Almost kept riding. Told myself it wasn't my business, that getting involved would only make things worse. But she was crying and I couldn't... He broke off. I couldn't be that man again. The one who wasn't there when it mattered. Sarah's fingers tightened on his. So I'm staying, Jacob continued. Not as charity, not as pity. As someone who understands that surviving alone isn't the same as living. And maybe if I can help you and Hannah get through this winter, it means something. It means the last 5 years weren't completely wasted. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sarah said quietly, William would have liked you. Yeah? He respected people who followed through, who did what needed doing without making a big production of it. She paused. And he would have understood about your wife. He lost his first wife to fever before he came west. I think that's why he was always so careful with me and Hannah. So afraid of losing us too. I didn't know. Most people don't. He didn't talk about it much, but I'd see it sometimes, this look in his eyes when he watched Hannah sleeping, like he was memorizing her, making sure he'd remember every detail if something happened. Jacob thought about Eleanor, about the way he'd started forgetting small things, the exact shade of her hair in summer, the sound of her laugh. The guilt of forgetting hurt almost as much as the loss itself. I should let you rest, he said finally. Mr. Cole. Sarah's voice stopped him at the door. Jacob. He turned. Thank you. For telling me. For staying. She hesitated. And for understanding that sometimes pride is all a person has left, even when it's killing them. Get some sleep, Mrs. Brennan. Sarah. He nodded once and stepped outside into the cold. That night, Hannah found him sitting on the chopping block, staring at nothing. "You okay, Mr. Cole?" "Fine, just thinking." She sat down beside him, her small body pressing close for warmth. "Mama seems better. She was talking more today. Even got mad about something which Mama says means she's definitely improving." Jacob almost smiled. "Got mad at me, actually." "What for?" "Doing her work while she's stuck in bed." "That's silly. Someone has to do it." "That's what I told her." Hannah was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mr. Cole, are you going to leave when Mama gets better? I told you I'm staying through winter." "I know. But after that—" Jacob looked at the girl, this child who'd already lost so much, who'd learned too young that people didn't always keep their promises, who was asking him for something he wasn't sure he knew how to give. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've been moving for a long time. Don't know how to do much else." "You could learn." Mama learned how to run a homestead after Papa died. She didn't know how to do it before. She said you can learn anything if you want to bad enough. "Your mama's a smart woman." "So are you." Hannah leaned against his arm. "And I don't want you to go. When you're here, things feel safe. Like they used to feel when Papa was alive." The words landed somewhere deep in Jacob's chest. He thought about Eleanor, about the child they'd never met, about all the years he'd spent telling himself he didn't deserve another chance at this, at family, at belonging, at home. "Let's just get through winter," he said. "One day at a time." "Okay." Hannah yawned, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "One day at a time." She fell asleep against his shoulder, and Jacob sat watching the stars wheel overhead, wondering how a crying child and a dying woman had somehow become the first thing that mattered to him in 5 years. He didn't have answers, but for the first time in a long time he wanted to find them. The blizzard hit 3 weeks later without warning. Jacob woke to a sound like a freight train bearing down on the cabin. Wind screamed through every gap in the walls, and the temperature had dropped so fast his breath crystallized in the air above his bed. "Hannah, Sarah!" He was on his feet before fully awake muscle memory driving him toward the fire that had burned down to embers. His hands fumbled for kindling, for matches, while the cabin groaned around them like a living thing in pain. "Jacob!" Sarah's voice cut through the howling. "What's happening?" "Storm. A bad one." He got the fire going, fed it until flames leaped high. "Stay in bed. Keep Hannah with you." "I'm here, Mama." Hannah's small form appeared from the shadows, crawling into bed beside her mother. "I'm right here." Jacob crossed to the window. He couldn't see anything beyond the glass, just white swirling chaos that seemed to consume the world. The lean-to where dust was sheltered sat maybe 30 feet from the cabin door, but it might as well have been 30 miles. "The horses," Sarah said, reading his thoughts. "Dust and the old mare we kept for plowing. They're in the lean-to." "I know. If the structure doesn't hold, I know." Jacob was already pulling on his coat, wrapping a scarf around his face. "I need to check on them. Make sure they've got water that hasn't frozen solid. You can't go out in that. You'll get lost 10 feet from the door. I've got rope. I'll tie one end here, follow it back." Sarah struggled to sit up, and Jacob saw real fear in her eyes for the first time since she'd woken from her fever. "Jacob, please. It's not worth—" "Those horses are the only way any of us gets anywhere until spring. They die, we're trapped here." He found the coil of rope by the door and began securing one end to the heavy table. "I'll be back in 10 minutes. 15 at most. And if you're not, then you keep that fire burning and that door barred, and you don't open it for anything until the storm passes." He met her gaze. "Hannah knows where the emergency supplies are. You'll survive." "That's not what I asked." No, it wasn't. But Jacob didn't have a better answer, so he pulled open the door and stepped into hell. The wind hit him like a physical blow, driving him back 2 steps before he braced himself and pushed forward. Snow filled his eyes, his nose, his mouth. He couldn't see the lean-to, couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. But he could feel the rope paying out behind him could count. His steps could trust the direction he'd chosen. 20 steps. 30. His fingers found rough wood, the lean-to wall. He followed it to the door, hauled it open against the wind, and stumbled inside. The horses were wild-eyed with terror, but alive. Dust whinnied at his approach, and the old plow mare stomped and snorted in her stall. Jacob checked their water frozen solid, just as he'd feared, and broke the ice with his boot heel, then filled the trough from the emergency barrel he'd placed inside the structure weeks ago. Easy, girl. Easy. He ran his hands along Dust's neck, feeling the mare's muscles trembling beneath her winter coat. Storm'll pass. They always do. But even as he said it, he heard something that made his blood freeze colder than the wind. A crack, loud as a gunshot. The roof beam. Jacob looked up just as the second crack echoed through the lean-to. The beam was splitting under the weight of accumulated snow. Snow that was still falling, still piling higher with every passing minute. If that beam gave way, both horses would be crushed. He didn't think. Just moved. Grabbed the support post that William Brennan had installed years ago and hauled it into position beneath the splitting beam. The wood groaned, held. But for how long? Come on. He grabbed Dust's halter and pulled. We're getting out of here. The mare fought him at first, terrified of the storm outside, but Jacob's hands were steady and his voice was calm, and eventually she followed. He tied her lead to the rope that led back to the cabin, and returned for the plow mare. She was harder, older, more set in her ways, more convinced that the familiar hell was better than the unknown. The beam cracked again. Move! Jacob slapped her hindquarters hard. The mare lunged forward, nearly trampling him, and he grabbed her halter just in time to guide her toward the door. Outside, the storm had somehow gotten worse. Jacob could barely breathe, could barely stand, could barely think. But the rope was there, and he followed it hand over hand, dragging 2 terrified horses through a world that had dissolved into white nothing. The cabin door appeared like a miracle. Sarah. Open the door. It swung wide, and Sarah stood there with a lantern held high, her face pale as the snow. Get them inside. Inside. Their horses. Inside. Now. Jacob didn't argue. He pulled both animals through the door, and Sarah slammed it shut behind them. The sudden silence, relative silence with the wind still screaming outside, but the walls holding it at bay, felt like a physical weight lifting. The lean-to, he gasped. Roof's going to collapse. The beam was... A crash cut him off. Even through the cabin walls, even over the storm, they heard it, the sound of the lean-to dying. Dear God, Sarah's hand found Jacob's arm. If you'd been in there... I wasn't. He was shaking, he realized. Not from cold, though he was frozen half through. From the nearness of it. From how close he'd come to being under that beam when it finally gave. Hannah appeared from the bedroom, her eyes huge. Are the horses okay? They're fine, sweetheart. Sarah's voice was remarkably steady. Mr. Cole saved them. And now they're in our cabin. Hannah's shock was giving way to something else, a wondering delight. We have horses in our cabin. Despite everything, Jacob felt his mouth twitch. Temporary arrangement. Soon as the storm passes. They can stay as long as they need to, Sarah said firmly. We'll manage. And somehow, impossibly, they did. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped in a small cabin with 2 women and 2 horses. 3 days of melting snow for water, of rationing firewood, of taking turns sleeping because someone always had to tend the fire. 3 days of learning each other in ways that months of ordinary life never could have taught. Sarah was stronger than Jacob had realized. Not just physically, though she was recovering faster than the doctor had predicted, but in all the ways that mattered. She organized their limited resources with military precision. She kept Hannah occupied with lessons and stories and small tasks. She never complained, never panicked, never let fear show in front of her daughter. But at night, when Hannah slept and the horses drowsed and the fire burned low, Jacob saw her hands tremble as she stared at the walls that kept the storm at bay. "You should sleep," he said on the second night. "I'll keep watch." "Can't." Sarah's voice was quiet. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you out there, in that storm, going for horses that might have already been dead." "They weren't. You didn't know that. You could have died, Jacob. For horses. For the horses that are the only way your daughter sees a doctor if she gets sick. The only way we get supplies if we run low. The only way anyone gets anywhere when the snow piles up 10 feet deep." He paused. "They're not just horses. They're survival." Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then, "William used to say something like that everything on a homestead connects to everything else, that you can't separate the animals from the people from the land." He was right. He was right about a lot of things. Sarah's gaze found the fire. He was right about me being too stubborn for my own good. Right about this territory being harder than I wanted to admit. Right about Hannah needing more stability than I knew how to give her. "Sounds like you're being pretty hard on yourself." "Am I?" Sarah turned to face him. "You've been here 3 weeks, Jacob. 3 weeks, and you've done more for this place than I managed in 8 months. You fixed the roof. Reinforced the walls, laid in enough wood to last until spring. You saved our horses from a collapsing building. You did all of that while I was lying in bed feeling sorry for myself. You were recovering from pneumonia that nearly killed you. I know, and I'm grateful, truly. But it doesn't change the fact that I was failing." Her voice caught. "Before you came, I was failing. Hannah was doing the work of 3 adults. Our stores were running low. The cabin was falling apart around us. And I kept telling myself we were fine, kept insisting we didn't need help, kept—" "Hey." Jacob moved to sit beside her. "You survived. You kept your daughter alive and safe through a Montana winter with no help from anyone. That's not failing. That's fighting like hell against impossible odds. And losing. You're not dead. Hannah's not dead. That's winning, Sarah. Everything else is details." She laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. "You really believe that?" "I have to." The words came out before he could stop them. "Because I spent 5 years believing the opposite. Believing that because I couldn't save Eleanor because I wasn't there when it mattered, I was a failure. That I'd used up my chance at doing right, and anything after that was just existing. Going through the motions." "What changed?" "Your daughter." Jacob's throat tightened. "Standing in the middle of nowhere, barefoot in the snow, screaming for someone to help. And I almost rode past, almost kept going. Almost proved myself right about being worthless. But you didn't." "No, I didn't. And I still don't know why. Something just broke open. All that running, all that hiding from anything that might matter, I couldn't do it anymore. Not with her standing there crying." Sarah's hand found his in the darkness. Her fingers were warm despite the cold cabin, and they wrapped around his with a certainty that made his breath catch. "I'm glad you stopped," she said quietly. "Me too." They sat like that until the fire burned to embers and the storm howled itself hoarse against the walls. Not speaking, not needing to, just present together in a moment that felt like the beginning of something neither had expected to find. On the morning of the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Jacob woke to silence. Actual silence. Not the muffled roar that had been constant for 72 hours. He was on his feet before he fully registered moving, crossing to the window, scraping frost from the glass. Outside, the world had transformed. Snow lay in drifts taller than a man, glittering under a sun that seemed impossibly bright after days of gray. The lean-to was a pile of shattered timber, half buried in white. The fence posts had vanished entirely, but the cabin stood. The cabin stood, and so did everyone in it. "Is it over?" Hannah appeared at his elbow, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "It's over." "Can we go outside?" "Not until I check how deep the snow is. Might be over your head in some places." "Over my head?" Hannah's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? So you stay here with your mama until I say it's safe. Understood?" "Yes, sir." But she was grinning, the adventure of it already overriding the terror. Children bounced back. It was one of the miracles of youth. Jacob spent the morning digging. He carved a path from the cabin door to where the lean-to had stood, salvaging what he could from the wreckage. The support beam had held just long enough the horses would have survived, even if he hadn't moved them probably. But it had been close. Too close. Sarah joined him in the afternoon, ignoring his protests that she should rest. "I've rested for a month," she said flatly. "My body's fine. My mind's going to crack if I don't do something useful." They worked side by side, clearing snow, assessing damage, making plans for rebuilding. The lean-to would need to be reconstructed entirely, but that was a spring project. For now, they could house the horses in the cabin's main room, awkward as it was. "We'll need supplies," Sarah said, surveying their diminished stores. "The storm ate through everything I'd set aside. We're looking at maybe 2 weeks before things get critical." "I'll ride to Cody tomorrow, trade what we can spare, bring back what we need." "With what money you gave everything to the doctor?" "I'll figure something out." "Jacob." Sarah's hand on his arm stopped him. "I have money. Not much, but some. William's emergency fund, he hid it before he died, told me not to touch it, unless we were truly desperate." "Are we truly desperate?" "A month ago, I would have said no. I would have insisted we could manage, that I'd find a way, that accepting help was the same as admitting defeat." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I'm done with that kind of thinking. It almost killed my daughter. Almost killed me. Almost killed you. The storm wasn't your fault." "No. But being unprepared for it was. Being too proud to accept help before we needed rescuing, that was my fault. And I won't make that mistake again." She turned and walked back toward the cabin, leaving Jacob standing in the snow with something shifting in his chest. He'd come here planning to stay through winter, get them stable, move on. Simple. Nothing about this was simple anymore. That night, Hannah asked the question Jacob had been dreading. "Mr. Cole, what happens when spring comes?" They were sitting by the fire, the family position they'd fallen into, without anyone deciding it should be so. Sarah in the good chair, Hannah on the floor by her feet, Jacob in the straight-backed chair he'd claimed as his own. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean, you said you're staying through winter. But winter's going to end. And then—" Hannah's voice trailed off. "Then what?" Jacob glanced at Sarah. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read carefully, neutral, guarded, waiting. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Do you want to leave?" The question hit him like a blow. Simple words, simply asked, carrying weight that had nothing simple about it. "Hannah." "Because if you want to leave, I understand. You've already done so much. More than anyone. And I know you had a life before you found me on that trail. A life you probably want to get back to." "I didn't have a life." The words came out rougher than intended. "I had movement. Going from place to place, taking work where I could find it, telling myself that keeping busy was the same as living. It wasn't. It was just surviving. Day to day. Waiting for something to matter again." "Does this matter?" Hannah's blue eyes held his. "Do we matter?" Jacob's throat closed. He thought about Eleanor, about the baby he'd never met. About 5 years of running from the memory of everything he'd lost. And he thought about this cabin, this woman, this child who'd grabbed his hand on a frozen trail and refused to let go. "Yeah," he said finally. "You matter." Hannah's face split into a grin so wide it seemed to light the whole room. She threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck, and Jacob held her the way he'd imagined holding his own daughter if she'd lived. "I knew it," Hannah mumbled against his shoulder. "I knew you'd stay." Jacob's eyes met Sarah's over her daughter's head. Sarah's careful neutrality had cracked. In its place was something raw and hopeful and terrified all at once. "Hannah," she said quietly, "it's time for bed." "But Mama." "Bed. Now. You can interrogate Mr. Cole about his future plans tomorrow." Hannah pulled back her expression, suggesting she saw exactly what her mother was doing and didn't appreciate it. But she went disappearing into the small bedroom with only one backward glance. The cabin fell quiet. Sarah stood and crossed to where Jacob sat. He started to rise, but she waved him back down and took Hannah's spot on the floor beside his chair. "She's right, you know," Sarah said. "You've done more for us than I had any right to ask. More than any stranger should have done." "You didn't ask. I offered." "Which is exactly my point." Sarah's hand found his knee, a light touch uncertain. "Jacob, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." "All right. When William died, I thought that was it. The end of everything that mattered. I loved him so much that I couldn't imagine loving anyone else. Couldn't imagine wanting to." She paused. "And then you showed up. This broken, stubborn man who'd been running from his own grief for 5 years. Who should have kept riding that day on the trail but didn't? Who gave up everything he had for a woman he'd never met?" "Sarah, let me finish." Her grip on his knee tightened. "I've watched you with Hannah. The way you listen to her. The way you take her seriously. The way you're teaching her to be brave without making her feel like she has to carry everything alone. William would have loved that. He would have looked at you and seen a kindred spirit. I'm not trying to replace him. I know. That's not what this is about." Sarah rose up on her knees, bringing her face level with his. "This is about me telling you that somewhere in the last month you became essential. Not because you chop wood or fix roofs or save horses from collapsing buildings. Because you're here. Because when I wake up in the middle of the night terrified that everything's going to fall apart again, I can hear you breathing on the other side of the cabin and it makes me feel safe. Sarah, I'm falling in love with you." The words came out fierce, almost angry. "And I know it's too soon, and I know you're probably not ready, and I know you came here planning to leave. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. It's not fair to you or to me or to Hannah." Jacob couldn't breathe. He looked at this woman, this fierce, stubborn, beautiful woman who'd been prepared to die rather than burden anyone with her struggles, who'd raised a daughter alone in the wilderness, who'd somehow found room in her grief-scarred heart for someone as broken as him. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally. "I don't know how to stay, how to build something, how to let myself need people again." "Neither do I. Not anymore." Sarah's hand moved to his face, cupping his cheek. "But I think maybe we could figure it out together, if you're willing to try. And if I fail, if I hurt you, if something happens and I'm not there just like before, then we'll deal with it, together." Sarah's thumb traced his cheekbone. "That's what I'm offering Jacob. Not perfection, not guarantees, just partnership. Two broken people trying to build something whole." The fear was still there. The voice in his head that had kept him running for 5 years, screaming that this was a mistake, that love only led to loss, that he'd already proven he couldn't be trusted with something this precious. But there was another voice now. Quieter, but somehow stronger. The voice that had made him stop on that trail. "Okay," Jacob whispered. "Okay. Okay, I'll try." He covered her hand with his. "I can't promise I won't mess up. Can't promise I won't get scared and want to run. But I can promise I'll try. And I can promise that right now, in this moment, there's nowhere else I'd rather be." Sarah's smile broke like dawn over winter mountains. And when she leaned in and kissed him soft and tentative, and full of possibility, Jacob kissed her back. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying whispers of snow yet to fall. But inside the cabin in the firelight's glow, two people who'd thought they'd lost everything found the courage to risk their hearts one more time. Winter wasn't over. But for the first time in 5 years, Jacob Cole wasn't counting the days until he could leave. He was counting the reasons to stay. The kiss changed everything, and nothing. Jacob still woke before dawn to tend the fire, still chopped wood until his shoulders ached, still worked alongside Sarah and Hannah to keep the homestead running. But now Sarah's hand would find his across the dinner table. Now Hannah would catch them standing too close and grin like she'd won a prize. Now the cabin felt less like a shelter, and more like something Jacob hadn't allowed himself to want in 5 years. A home. "You're smiling again," Hannah announced one morning 3 weeks after the storm. "Am I?" "You never used to smile. When you first came, your face was all—" She scrunched up her features into a scowl. "Like that. All the time." "I did not look like that." "You did. Mama said you looked like a man who'd forgotten how to be happy." Hannah cocked her head. "Did you forget?" Jacob set down the harness he'd been mending. "I think maybe I did, for a while." "But you remember now." "I'm learning." Hannah's smile could have melted the snow piled against the cabin walls. "Good, because happy looks better on you." She darted away before he could respond, leaving Jacob with something warm spreading through his chest. Learning. That was the right word for it. Every day felt like relearning how to live rather than just survive. February brought a brief thaw that turned the snow to slush and the paths to mud. Jacob used the reprieve to assess the damage from the storm and start planning the rebuild. The lean-to was a total loss. He'd need lumber nails tools he didn't have, all of which meant a trip to Cody, and all of which cost money they barely had. "We could sell one of the horses," Sarah said that evening. "The plow mare. She's old, but she'd fetch something. And what happens come spring when we need to work the fields? We manage without. People did it before horses. We could—" "No." Jacob's voice came out sharper than intended. "We're not selling the mare. There has to be another way." "Such as—" He didn't have an answer. The silence stretched between them heavy with unspoken fears. "I could work," Jacob said finally. "Pick up jobs in town. There's always someone who needs fences mended, or horses broke, and leave us here alone." Sarah's jaw tightened. "After everything?" "It would only be a few days at a time, a week at most." That's what William said, before he died. The words hung in the air like smoke. He'd take jobs to earn extra money, be gone for days, and then one morning he rode out to check on the herd and never came back. Jacob moved to her side, taking her hands in his. "I'm not William." "No, you're not. But you're also not immortal, and this territory doesn't care how much I—" She stopped, swallowed. "How much we need you." "Sarah. I can't lose someone else." Her voice cracked. "I can't watch another man ride away and wonder every hour if he's coming back. I did that for 3 years with William. Loved him so much it felt like dying every time he left. And then one day he didn't come back, and the dying became real." Jacob pulled her close, feeling her tremble against his chest. "I hear you. We'll find another way. Promise." He thought about all the promises he'd made, the ones he'd kept, the ones he'd broken, the weight of them pressing down like snow on a sagging roof. "I promise we'll find another way. Together." The other way found them 3 days later. Jacob was returning from checking the fence line when he spotted a wagon approaching from the east. 2 figures sat on the bench, a man and woman both wrapped in heavy coats against the lingering cold. He reached for his revolver out of habit, then stopped. Something about the woman's profile triggered recognition. "Mrs. Johansson." The wagon pulled to a stop. Ida Johansson's weathered face peered down at him, her expression carrying something between guilt and determination. Mr. Cole, we heard you were staying with the Brennans. Heard from who? Dr. Webb. He came through last week, mentioned you'd helped Mrs. Brennan through her sickness. Ida exchanged a glance with her husband. We came to apologize. Jacob's jaw tightened. Apologize. When Hannah came to us that day begging for help, Ida's voice faltered. We turned her away. Told her we had our own troubles. And we do. But that's no excuse. That child walked barefoot through snow looking for someone to save her mother, and we shut our door in her face. Lars Johansson spoke for the first time. We were scared, lost half our cattle to disease, and we thought maybe whatever Mrs. Brennan had might spread, might take what little we had left. So you let a woman die to protect your livestock. We didn't know she was dying. Ida's eyes were wet. We thought we told ourselves it couldn't be that bad, that Sarah was strong enough to pull through on her own, that we'd check on them in a few days when we had time. A few days would have been too late. We know. Lars' voice was rough. That's why we're here. We can't undo what we did, but we can try to make it right. Jacob looked at them, this elderly couple who'd made a terrible choice out of fear and now sat in his yard carrying the weight of it. He wanted to hate them, wanted to tell them to leave and never come back. But he thought about all the terrible choices he'd made out of fear. All the people he'd failed because it was easier to ride away than stay and face the hard parts. What are you offering? Lumber. Lars gestured to the wagon bed. We had stores set aside for a new barn. We won't be building this year, can't afford to, so we're giving them to you. For the lean-to rebuild. And these. Ida reached behind the bench and produced a basket covered with cloth. Preserved vegetables, canned meat, what we can spare without starving ourselves. Jacob stood frozen, not sure whether to accept or refuse. We're not asking forgiveness, Ida said quietly. What we did was wrong, and saying sorry doesn't fix it. But we can help now, if you'll let us. The cabin door opened behind him. Sarah emerged, Hannah at her side. Mrs. Johansson. Sarah's voice was carefully neutral. Mr. Johansson. Mrs. Brennan. Ida climbed down from the wagon, her movements stiff with age and cold. We came to... I heard. The window was open. Sarah crossed her arms. You let my daughter walk barefoot through a blizzard. Yes. You could have helped. Even if you were afraid, you could have given her a horse, ridden for the doctor yourselves, something. Yes. My daughter almost died because of your fear. Yes. Ida's voice broke. And we have to live with that. Every day for the rest of our lives we have to live with knowing we almost let a child lose her mother because we were too scared to do the right thing. Silence stretched between them. Jacob watched Sarah's face, seeing the battle there. Anger against compassion, hurt against the practical reality that they needed allies to survive. Finally, Sarah spoke. Hannah, what do you think? The question surprised everyone. Hannah stepped forward, her small face serious as she studied the Johanssons. When I came to your house that day, she said slowly, I thought you were mean. I thought you didn't care about Mama, or me, or anything except yourselves. Ida flinched. But then, Mr. Cole told me something. He said sometimes people make bad choices because they're scared. And being scared doesn't make you evil. It just makes you human. Hannah paused. Are you still scared? Every day, Ida whispered. Every day, I'm scared we won't make it through winter. Scared Lars will get sick and I won't be able to help him. Scared of everything this territory can throw at us. Then maybe we should be scared together. Hannah's chin lifted. Because being scared alone is worse, I know. I was alone with Mama for 4 days, and I was more scared than I've ever been in my whole life. But then Mr. Cole came and I wasn't alone anymore, and the scared got smaller. Jacob's chest constricted. 8 years old, and she understood something it had taken him 30 years to learn. Sarah's expression softened. She looked at Jacob, then at the Johanssons, then at her daughter. "All right," she said finally. "We accept your help. And your apology, not because what you did was forgivable, but because holding on to anger takes energy we can't spare." Ida's face crumpled with relief. Thank you, Mrs. Brennan." "Sarah, if we're going to be neighbors again, you might as well use my name." The Johanssons stayed for hours. Lars helped Jacob unload the lumber and plan the lean-to rebuild. Ida sat with Sarah and Hannah sharing stories and recipes and the accumulated wisdom of 15 years on the Wyoming frontier. By the time they left, something had shifted. Not friendship, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become friendship given time and effort and the willingness to keep showing up. "You handled that well," Jacob told Sarah that night. "I wanted to slam the door in their faces." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact. "Wanted to tell them exactly what I thought of people who turn away dying women and barefoot children." "But you didn't." Hannah was watching, and she'd already forgiven them in her way. How could I hold on to anger she'd let go of? "You could have. Wouldn't have blamed you." "No, but I would have blamed myself." Sarah leaned against his shoulder. "William used to say that grudges were luxury items. Out here you can't afford to make enemies of people who might be the only help available when the next crisis hits." "Smart man." "He was. I miss him." She paused. "Is that strange? To miss him while I'm falling in love with someone else?" "No." Jacob's arm tightened around her. "I still miss Eleanor sometimes. Doesn't mean I don't want to be here with you." "How do you do it?" "Hold both things at the same time." "Haven't figured that out yet. Just know that some days the grief is louder and some days it's quieter and loving. You doesn't erase what I felt for her. It's more like making room, building something new alongside what used to be." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I like that. Making room." They sat together until the fire burned low. Two people who'd learned that love wasn't a finite resource, that the heart could expand to hold both memory and hope, grief and joy, the past, and the possibility of something better. March arrived with a teasing warmth that made everyone restless. Hannah spent every spare moment outside helping with chores, practicing her riding on dust, drinking in the sunshine like someone who'd been starving for it. "I want to check the north fence," she announced one morning. "By myself." Sarah's immediate response was visible in the tension of her shoulders. "Hannah, I know the way. Mr. Cole showed me twice, and I'll take dust, and I'll be careful, and I promise I'll be back before noon." "It's too far. If something happened." "Mama?" Hannah's voice carried unexpected authority. "I'm 8 years old. I survived walking barefoot through a blizzard. I can check a fence line." Jacob watched the exchange, seeing both sides. Sarah's fear was real, justified by everything she'd lost, everything that could still go wrong. But Hannah's need to prove herself was real too. The need to know she could handle things, that she wasn't just a child to be protected, but a person who could contribute. "What if I follow behind?" he offered. "Give her a half-hour head start, then ride out to meet her. She gets her independence, you get your peace of mind." Hannah's face scrunched up. "That's not really independence. It's a compromise, which is what adults call it, when nobody gets exactly what they want, but everybody gets something." Sarah's tension eased slightly. "That's acceptable. But you check in at every fence post, Hannah. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, you turn around and come straight home." "Yes, Mama." "And you take the whistle, the one your father made, if you get in trouble." "I'll blow it 3 times, I know." Hannah was already moving toward the door, vibrating with excitement. "Can I go now?" Sarah nodded, and the girl was gone in a flash, her footsteps pounding across the yard toward where dust waited in the makeshift shelter they'd rigged. "She's growing up," Jacob said quietly. Too fast. Much too fast. Sarah's voice caught. Sometimes I look at her and see the baby William held the day she was born. Then I blink, and she's this fierce little person who's been through more than most adults ever face. She's strong, like her mother. She's strong like her father. William never backed down from anything. Sarah paused. He would have loved watching you teach her to ride. He'd started before he died, just the basics, but Hannah was so excited. Then he was gone, and I had to sell the good horse, and she lost that too. She hasn't lost it, just got it back a different way. Sarah turned to face him. Is that what we're doing? Getting things back a different way? Maybe. Or maybe we're getting something new entirely, something that couldn't have existed before. I like that thought. She kissed him softly. Now, go follow my daughter before I change my mind and lock her in the cabin until she's 30. Jacob found Hannah at the third fence post, exactly where she should have been. She was off Dust's back, examining something on the ground, her small body tensed with concentration. What did you find? Tracks. Hannah pointed. Something big came through here. See how the snow's all churned up? Jacob dismounted and crouched beside her. The tracks were elk, a small herd from the look of it, probably passing through on their way to lower ground. Elk. Maybe 6 or 7. That's good, right? Means there's game if we need it. It's good. Shows the land is healthy. Hannah's face glowed with pride. I spotted them myself. You didn't have to tell me. No, I didn't. Jacob straightened, meeting her eyes. You're going to be a good rancher someday, if that's what you want. I want to stay here forever, with you and Mama. I want this to be home always. The simple certainty of it struck Jacob like a blow. Home. Always. When had he stopped running long enough to want that, Mr. Cole? Hannah's voice pulled him back. Can I ask you something? Anything. Are you going to marry Mama? The question hung in the cold air. Jacob felt his heart stutter. That's a big question. I know. But I need to know. Hannah's blue eyes held his with intensity beyond her years. Because if you're going to leave, I want to know now. I want to be ready. I don't want to wake up one day and find out you're gone, like Papa was gone. Hannah, I'm not being mean. I love you, Mr. Cole. I love you like I loved Papa, and that's scary because loving people means they can hurt you. They can leave, and I need to know if you're going to leave. Jacob knelt in the snow, bringing himself to her eye level. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise, and I know my promises maybe don't mean much. They mean everything. Hannah's voice was fierce. You promised you'd come back that first night, and you did. You promised you'd stay through winter, and you did. Every promise you made you kept. So if you promise you're not leaving, I believe you. The faith in her eyes nearly undid him. I promise, he said, his voice rough. I'm not leaving. This is my home now. You and your Mama, you're my family. Hannah threw her arms around his neck, holding on with the fierce grip of a child who'd learned too young how fragile life could be. I'm glad you stopped that day, she whispered. I'm glad you heard me crying and didn't ride past. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. They returned to the cabin to find Sarah waiting in the doorway. Her face was strange pale, almost frightened, but with something else underneath. Something that made Jacob's chest tighten with sudden worry. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Sarah's voice trembled. I need to talk to you, both of you. They followed her inside. She moved to the table, sat down heavily, her hands clasping and unclasping in her lap. Mama, you're scaring me. I'm scaring myself. Sarah laughed, but it came out shaky. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. But I saw Ida Johansson yesterday when she brought over the preserves, and she took one look at me and asked when I was due. Jacob's world tilted. I'm pregnant." Sarah's eyes found his filled with equal parts terror and wonder. "I'm going to have a baby." The cabin fell silent. Hannah moved first, a small cry of joy as she launched herself at her mother. "Mama, a baby. I'm going to be a sister." But Jacob couldn't move, couldn't breathe. A baby. The word echoed in his head like a gunshot. He'd lost one baby. Lost Eleanor trying to bring that baby into the world. Had sworn he'd never put himself in that position again. Never risk caring about something so fragile. And now Sarah was pregnant. Now there was another life depending on him to be there, to be present, to not fail the way he'd failed before. "Jacob!" Sarah's voice cut through the panic. "Say something, please." He looked at her, this woman he'd come to love, carrying a child he'd helped create. Terror and joy warred in his chest, and he didn't know which one was winning. "I need air," he managed, and walked out the door before anyone could stop him. He made it to the fence line before his legs gave out. Jacob sat in the snow, head in his hands, fighting the urge to run, to saddle dust, and ride until the territory disappeared behind him, until the fear couldn't find him anymore. Eleanor's face swam up from memory, pale and still. Gone. He'd failed her, failed their baby, and now he was supposed to try again, risk everything again. Trust himself with something this precious after proving he couldn't be trusted. "You're allowed to be scared, you know." Sarah's voice. He hadn't heard her approach. "I'm not scared." Liar. She lowered herself to sit beside him, moving carefully the way women did when their bodies were changing. "You're terrified, and so am I." "Then why are you smiling?" "Because I'm also happy. Both things can be true." She took his hand. "I know about Eleanor, about the baby. I know what this must feel like, being asked to do it again. I wasn't there." The words scraped his throat raw. "I was 30 miles away earning money that didn't matter, and she died alone and the baby died, and I never even got to. I know. If something happens to you, then you'll be here, Jacob. That's the difference." Sarah squeezed his hand hard. "You're not 30 miles away. You're not choosing work over presence. You're right here, and you're going to stay right here because that's who you are now. That's who this place made you. You can't know that nothing will go wrong." "No, I can't. But I can know that whatever happens, I won't face it alone. And neither will you." She paused. "That's what I learned this winter. Not that bad things won't happen, they will. But that facing them together is different than facing them alone." Jacob looked at her. Really looked. This woman who'd lost her husband and nearly died and somehow kept fighting. Who'd raised a daughter in the wilderness and refused to quit even when everything said she should. Who'd opened her heart to a broken stranger and trusted him with everything she had. She deserved better than his fear. "I'm still terrified," he admitted. "Good. Me too. We can be terrified together." Something shifted in his chest. The panic didn't disappear, but it loosened, made room for something else. Hope. "A baby," he said slowly. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby." Jacob pulled her close, feeling her warmth against him, feeling the faint flutter of possibility where their bodies pressed together. "I'm not going anywhere," he said into her hair. "I'm staying right here. For you. For Hannah. For this baby. For all of it. Promise?" "Promise." Sarah smiled against his chest. "Then let's go tell our daughter she's going to be a sister." They walked back to the cabin together, hands linked. Behind them, the winter sun climbed higher, beginning the slow work of melting the snow. And inside, Jacob Cole, something that had been frozen for 5 years, was finally starting to thaw. Spring arrived with a violence that matched the winter before it. The snow melted in torrents, turning the hollow into a temporary lake before draining into the creek that ran behind the property. Jacob worked from dawn to dusk rebuilding the lean-to with the Johanssons' lumber-mending fences preparing the ground for planting. And watching Sarah. Her belly had begun to show in the weeks since she'd told him. A small curve beneath her dress that made Jacob's heart clench every time he noticed it. Equal parts terror and wonder, just as she'd promised. "Stop staring at me like I'm going to break," Sarah said one morning, catching him watching as she kneaded bread dough. "I'm not staring." "You are. You've been doing it for 3 weeks. Every time I lift something heavier than a spoon, you look like you're about to have a heart attack. The doctor said you shouldn't. The doctor said I shouldn't overexert myself. Kneading bread isn't overexertion, it's breakfast." Jacob opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right. He knew she was right. But the fear that had loosened its grip after their conversation in the snow was always there waiting to tighten again. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know." Sarah's hands stilled on the dough. "But you can't protect me from everything, Jacob. This baby is coming whether we're ready or not. All we can do is face it together." "What if together isn't enough?" "Then at least we tried." She crossed to him, flour-dusted hands framing his face. "That's all anyone can do. Try, show up, keep going even when it's hard." "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between burying my husband and nearly dying of pneumonia." Her smile was sad but real. "Turns out almost losing everything teaches you what actually matters." Jacob pulled her close, careful of the small life growing between them. "I love you," he said. The words still felt strange on his tongue, unfamiliar after 5 years of refusing to say them to anyone. "I know. I love you too." Sarah pulled back to meet his eyes. "Now stop hovering and go finish the lean-to. Those horses need a proper home before the baby arrives." Cheat. The proposal came on a Tuesday in late April. Not planned, not orchestrated. Just Jacob looking across the dinner table at Sarah and Hannah and knowing with sudden absolute certainty that he wanted this to be permanent. "Marry me." The words dropped into the middle of Hannah's story about finding a bird's nest near the creek. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Hannah's mouth fell open. "What? Marry me?" Jacob's voice steadied as he said it again. "I don't have a ring. Don't have much of anything, really. But I have this." He gestured at the cabin at the 3 of them gathered around the table. "I have what we've built here, and I want to make it official." "Jacob, I know it's fast. I know there are reasons to wait, but I've been waiting my whole life to find something worth staying for, and now that I've found it, I don't want to waste another minute pretending I don't want forever." Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. "You're serious." "Dead serious. I want to be your husband. I want to be Hannah's father, legally, officially, in every way that counts. I want this baby to be born to parents who are married, who chose each other, yes, who built something together from nothing and decided it was worth—" Jacob stopped. "Wait, yes. Sarah was laughing now, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, you ridiculous man. Yes, I'll marry you." Hannah shrieked with joy, launching herself from her chair to throw her arms around both of them. The 3 of them stood tangled together in the small cabin, laughing and crying and holding on. "I knew it," Hannah said through her tears. "I knew you'd stay. I knew it the first day. How could you possibly have known that?" "Because you came back." Hannah's voice was simple, certain. "When you went for the doctor that first night, you could have kept going. But you came back. That's when I knew." Jacob's throat tightened. He thought about all the times in his life he hadn't come back. All the promises broken, all the people left behind. But he'd come back for Hannah, come back for Sarah, and he'd keep coming back every day for the rest of his life. The wedding was simple. Dr. Webb stood as witness along with the Johanssons and a traveling preacher who happened through Cody the week they'd set for the ceremony. They gathered in the cabin that William Brennan had built, the cabin that had sheltered Sarah through widowhood, nearly claimed her life to pneumonia, and somehow become home to a stranger who'd stopped because a child was crying. Do you, Jacob Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Jacob looked at Sarah. She wore her best dress let out at the seams to accommodate her growing belly. Her hair was pinned back, revealing the face he'd come to know better than his own. "I do." "Do you, Sarah Brennan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Sarah's smile could have lit the darkest night. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife." Jacob kissed her gently, aware of Hannah watching with a grin wide enough to split her face, aware of the witnesses sniffling in the background, aware of the small life between them that would soon make their family complete. "I love you, Mrs. Cole," he murmured against her lips. "That's going to take some getting used to." Sarah laughed. "But I love you too, Mr. Cole." Summer brought heat and growth and the relentless work of a homestead coming back to life. Jacob finished rebuilding the lean-to stronger than before. He mended every foot of fence, cleared new ground for planting, dug a root cellar that would keep their stores safe through the next winter. And he watched Sarah grow. Her belly swelled with each passing week, the baby making its presence known through kicks and rolls that Jacob could feel when he pressed his hand to her stomach at night. "Active little thing," he observed one evening, feeling a particularly strong kick. "Takes after someone I know." Sarah shifted, trying to find a comfortable position. "Can't sit still for 5 minutes?" "I sit still." "You absolutely do not. Yesterday I watched you mend a fence, chop wood, reorganize the entire tool shed, and build Hannah a new bookshelf. That's not sitting still." "I like to keep busy." "You like to avoid thinking." Sarah's voice softened. "It's okay, Jacob. I know you're still scared." He didn't deny it. The closer they got to Sarah's due date, the louder the fear became. Some nights he lay awake listening to her breathe, counting each inhale and exhale like prayers. "I keep thinking about Eleanor," he admitted. "About what went wrong, about all the things I should have done differently. What happened to Eleanor wasn't your fault." "I wasn't there." "No, you weren't. And you've spent 5 years punishing yourself for that. But being here now, being present for this baby, for me, for Hannah, that's the only thing you can control. The past is finished, Jacob. All we have is now. What if now goes wrong too?" Sarah took his hand and pressed it to her belly. Beneath his palm, the baby kicked. "Then we face it together. That's what we promised, remember, together." Jacob closed his eyes. The baby kicked again, strong and insistent. "Together," he echoed. The labor started on a morning in early August. Jacob was working on the new fence section when Hannah came running, her face white with panic. "Mama says to get Dr. Webb. The baby's coming." The fear hit like a lightning strike. Jacob dropped his tools and ran for the cabin, his heart pounding so hard he could barely hear anything else. Sarah stood by the bed, one hand braced against the wall, the other cradling her belly. Her face was tight with pain. "How long?" "Contractions started an hour ago. I didn't want to worry you until I was sure." She gasped as another pain hit. "I'm sure now." "I'll ride for the doctor." "No." Sarah's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. "Don't leave me." "But you need—" "I need you. Right here. Hannah can ride." "She's 8 years old. She's been riding alone for 2 months. She knows the way. And I cannot—" Sarah's voice broke as another contraction seized her. "I cannot do this without you beside me." Jacob looked at Hannah. The girl stood in the doorway, pale but determined. "I can do it," she said. "I can ride to Cody. I'll bring the doctor back. It's 12 miles. I know. I've done it before with Mama." Hannah's chin lifted. "I'm not scared." She was lying. He could see it in the tremble of her hands, the too bright gleam in her eyes. But she was doing it anyway, pushing past the fear, because someone she loved needed her. Just like that day on the trail, when she'd stood barefoot in the snow and begged a stranger for help. "All right." Jacob crouched to her level. "You ride straight there. Don't stop for anything. Find Dr. Webb and tell him the baby's coming early. Can you do that? Yes. I believe you. He pulled her into a fierce hug. Go. Fast as you can. Hannah was out the door and running before he'd finished speaking. Moments later, he heard Dust's hooves pounding away into the distance. Then Sarah cried out, and everything else disappeared. The hours that followed were the longest of Jacob's life. He'd helped deliver calves. He'd seen men wounded on cattle drives, had sat with them while life bled away. But nothing had prepared him for this Sarah's pain, her fear, his complete helplessness. You're doing fine, he said, not knowing if it was true. Just breathe. Keep breathing. Easy for you to say. Sarah's laugh turned into a gasp. You're not the one being torn apart from the inside. I'd trade if I could. Liar. But she squeezed his hand, and he saw gratitude beneath the pain. Thank you for staying. Where else would I be? 30 miles away, earning money, doing the practical thing. Another contraction hit, and Sarah's grip turned crushing. That's what men do, leave the hard parts to women. I'm not leaving. I know. Tears streamed down her face. I know you're not. That's why I love you. The door burst open. Dr. Webb strode in Hannah on his heels. The girl's face was flushed, her hair wild from the ride, but she was grinning with triumph. I brought him. I rode all the way, and I brought him back. You did good, sweetheart. Jacob gathered her into a one-armed hug without releasing Sarah's hand. You did so good. Dr. Webb was already examining Sarah, his weathered face unreadable. Jacob watched his heart in his throat. Well, baby's coming. Position looks good. The doctor straightened. Mr. Cole, I need hot water and clean cloths. Miss Hannah, you keep that fire burning. This could take a while. It took 6 hours. 6 hours of Sarah's cries, of Dr. Webb's calm instructions, of Hannah running back and forth with water and cloths and whatever else was needed. 6 hours of Jacob holding Sarah's hand and praying to a God he'd stopped believing in years ago. Please, please let them live. And then, just as the evening light began to fade, a new sound filled the cabin. A baby's cry. It's a boy, Dr. Webb announced, his voice gruff with emotion. Healthy lungs on this one. Hear that? Jacob couldn't hear anything past the roaring in his ears. He stared at the small, squalling creature in the doctor's hands, red-faced and furious and perfect. Sarah. Sarah, look. But Sarah's eyes were already fixed on their son. Her face, pale and exhausted, glowed with something that transcended the pain. He's beautiful, she whispered. Jacob, he's beautiful. The doctor placed the baby in Sarah's arms. Jacob stared at the tiny face, the miniature fingers, the shock of dark hair. He's got your hair, Sarah said. He's got your stubbornness. Jacob's voice cracked. Already making his presence known. Hannah crept closer, her eyes wide with wonder. Can I see my brother? Sarah shifted so Hannah could look. The baby had stopped crying, his eyes unfocused, but open, seeming to search for something. Hi, Hannah whispered. I'm your sister. I'm going to teach you everything. How to ride, and how to check fence lines, and how to make Mama laugh when she's sad. Something broke open in Jacob's chest. 5 years ago, he'd lost everything. A wife, a child, a future he'd thought was certain. Now he stood in a cabin in Wyoming, surrounded by a family he'd never expected to find. A wife who loved him despite his brokenness. A daughter who'd chosen him. A son who represented everything he'd been afraid to hope for. What should we name him? Sarah asked. Jacob thought about William Brennan, the man who'd built this cabin, who'd loved Sarah and Hannah, who'd died doing the work of keeping his family safe. William, he said. William Cole. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. Are you sure? He should know where he comes from. Both of you should know that I'm not trying to erase what William meant. I'm just trying to add to it. William Cole. Sarah tested the name, then smiled. It's perfect. Yeah. That night, after the doctor had left and Hannah had finally fallen asleep, Jacob sat beside the bed, watching Sarah nurse their son. "You're staring again," she murmured. "Can't help it." He reached out to touch the baby's cheek, marveling at the softness. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all have been a dream." "It's not a dream. It's real. We're real." "I know. He struggled for words. "This time last year, I was riding through Montana with nothing. No purpose. No reason to stop anywhere. And then your daughter found me on that trail, and everything changed." "She saved all of us," Sarah said quietly. "Hannah saved you. You saved me. This baby is proof that sometimes broken pieces can come together into something whole." Jacob leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I love you." "I know." Her smile was tired, but radiant. "Now go get some sleep. William is going to have us up again in a few hours, and you've been awake for almost 2 days. Can't sleep." "Why not?" "Because I've spent 5 years running from moments like this, and now that I'm finally here, I don't want to miss a single second." Sarah's hand found his. "You won't miss anything, I promise." "That's my line." "Then we'll share it." She squeezed his fingers. "No more running. For either of us." "No more running," Jacob agreed. And for the first time in 5 years, the words didn't feel like a lie. October came with the first hints of the winter to follow. Jacob stood on the porch, watching Hannah ride dust along the fence line, her form perfect, her confidence absolute. She'd grown so much in the year since he'd found her on that trail, taller, stronger, more certain of her place in the world. In his arms, William squirmed and fussed, 2 months old, and already developing opinions about everything. "Shh, your sister's showing off. Pay attention." The baby gurgled, unimpressed. "Fine, don't appreciate good horsemanship. See if I teach you to ride." "You'll teach him." Sarah appeared at his side, wrapping her arm around his waist. "You'll teach him everything just like you're teaching Hannah." "She doesn't need much teaching anymore. She's a natural." "She has a good teacher." They watched together as Hannah completed her circuit, pulling dust to a stop by the rebuilt lean-to. She waved, her grin visible, even at this distance. "A year ago, I didn't know any of you existed," Jacob said quietly. "I was just a man on a horse going nowhere. And now I'm home." The word settled over him like a blanket. Home. He'd spent so long believing he'd lost his chance at it. That men like him, men who failed when it mattered most, didn't get second chances. But here he was. Husband, father, the man who'd stopped when a child cried for help. "I've been thinking," Sarah said. About what we're building here. About what it might become." She turned to face him. "William? My William?" Hannah's father. He had dreams for this place. Cattle crops, maybe even a town someday. He used to talk about creating something that would last. Sounds like him. I think he'd want us to try. To make those dreams real. Sarah paused. "What do you think?" Jacob looked at the cabin, at the repaired lean-to, at the fences. He'd mended the ground, he'd cleared the foundation he'd been building without quite realizing it. "I think we've got time to figure it out, together." "Together," Sarah agreed. Hannah rode up, sliding from Dust's back with practiced ease. "What are you two talking about?" "The future," Jacob said. "What kind of future?" "The kind where we stay here, all of us, for good." Hannah's face split into a grin. "I like that kind of future." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." That night after dinner, after Hannah had read to her baby brother from the same worn copy of Robinson Crusoe they'd shared the previous winter, after the fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin had settled into the peaceful quiet of a home well lived in, Jacob stepped outside. The stars spread above him in countless thousands, the same stars he'd watched from 100 different campsites over 5 years of running. But they looked different now. Brighter somehow, more like promises than accusations. He heard the door open behind him, Sarah's footsteps soft on the wooden porch. Couldn't sleep. Just thinking. About what? About the day I heard Hannah crying on that trail. Jacob turned to face his wife. I almost kept writing. Almost convinced myself it wasn't my business. Almost stayed the man I'd been for 5 years alone, empty, going through the motions. But you didn't. No, I didn't. He reached for her hand, pulling her close. And I've been trying to figure out why. What made that moment different? What made me stop? Did you figure it out? I think so. Jacob's voice was steady. I stopped because somewhere deep down I knew I was dying. Not physically, but the part of me that was capable of caring about anything that was dying a little more every day. And when I heard Hannah scream, something in me recognized it as my last chance. My last chance to choose life instead of just survival. Sarah's hand tightened on his. And now I'm alive. Really alive for the first time in 5 years. He cupped her face in his hands. Because of you. Because of Hannah. Because of William. Because this family gave me something worth living for. You gave us something too, Sarah said softly. You gave us hope. When everything seemed impossible, when I'd lost my husband and nearly lost my life, you showed up. You stayed. You made us believe that second chances were real. They are real. We're proof. We are. Sarah smiled. So what now? Jacob looked back at the cabin. Through the window, he could see the glow of the fire, the shapes of the cradle and the bookshelf, and all the small touches that had transformed a house into a home. Now we keep building, he said. One day at a time, one promise at a time, until we've created something that can outlast us both. That sounds like a plan? It's more than a plan. It's a vow. He met her eyes. I vow to be here, every morning, every night, through every storm and every calm, for the rest of my life. Sarah kissed him softly. I vow the same. They stood together under the stars, two people who'd lost everything and found their way back to hope. Behind them in the cabin, William Brennan had built their children slept peacefully, and ahead of them stretched a future neither had dared to imagine, but both had been brave enough to build. Some stories end with a rescue. This one ended with a family. A man who stopped running, a woman who learned to ask for help, a daughter who never gave up hope, and a son born from the ashes of old grief, proof that love could grow in the most unexpected places. Jacob Cole had spent 5 years believing his chance at happiness was gone forever. He'd been wrong. Because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do isn't ride away from trouble, it's ride toward it, dismount, and stay. That's what Jacob did on a frozen trail in Wyoming when a child's cry made him choose connection over isolation, hope over fear, life over mere existence. And that choice made all the difference.